Thank you, Carla and Pat, for inviting me down here. I'm a little ragged. I just drove 300 miles from the Yankee Sioux tribe today across beautiful Highway 18, that Oyate Trail, and it's just marvelous this time of year with all the green. So I fall asleep up here waiting. Eric, you know, I'm so short of wind that you have to bear with me. And earlier this week, I serve on the State Tribal Relations Committee, and we were also at the Flanders Sioux Tribe. And I'll speak a little bit about that later. But first of all, I just like to feel like I'm back to my second home. 20 years ago, after I left the East for the third time, I'd like to say I served 3 hardship posts in Washington, D.C. I came back to Smithwick and stayed with a pretty wild codger that some of you may know, Bob Lyons. He was an old friend from Corson County. And, yes, everyone can sticker. But it was a great time to return home and to come back to these feeds. I think it's been probably nearly a decade since I've been to the corn feed here, so it's great to be back. But saw Vi Beaver starting out tonight. Wonderful to see Vi again. And Catherine Ratliff, Dave Ender, old good friends. And when I was at Smithwick, I was so proud of that little town. And I grew up in McIntosh, which is also very small. And this was the first year I ran in the senior game, so this was a long time ago. But I actually had a shirt made that said #1 in the center, Smithwick on top and McIntosh on the bottom. And I think that's the most press either of those two little towns ever received. I want to talk a little bit about the legislature in the past couple of sessions. And I want to touch a little bit on the State Tribal Relations Committee meetings that I've participated in the last 2 days. And then finally a little bit about perhaps the wildest race in South Dakota, mine and a couple of others. And we'll reflect a little bit on District 30 as well. But we'll start out with the legislature. I was a freshman 2 years ago, and when you run very hard, as we did, and won 53% and a 55% Republican district, and I ran for all the people. And I would encourage all our candidates to look in that direction. I say at the doors, don't color me Republican red, don't color me Democratic blue, color me purple for all the people. And I think people generally really like folks that try to reach across the partisan divisions and make government really work. And David, change is coming. It's got a long ways to go yet. But we've had a couple of pretty good years in the Senate in South Dakota. Unfortunately, we've got a long ways to go in both the House and the governors. But what happened in the Senate in 2006 is that 5 Democrats beat out 5 extreme right-wing Republicans. And then in the Republican caucus, that split their party 20 senators, 10 each, moderate and extremist. And the moderates won out. And as a consequence, generally, the 10 moderate Republicans and the 15 Democrats voted together on issues. Generally, the Democrats had issues that were perhaps more for people, but our moderate Republican friends were very helpful. And to the surprise of a lot of people, for the first time in many years, bipartisanism came back in South Dakota, in the Senate. David's perfectly correct. We've had many years out in the wilderness, and the House needs to change this next time around to at least get to, so it's more than a third, so it's veto-proof. And we certainly have to change the governorship in 2 years. But let me talk a little bit about some of the legislation that I was active in, were the themes, I think, of the Democrats and the moderate Republicans. And the 3 major issues we addressed over the past couple of years is the whole area of jobs and economic development, education, and health care. In the area of jobs, I actually sponsored a bill for a living wage. And the concept behind it is that we shouldn't have just a minimum wage. We ought to have a wage out here that folks can live on. And the way I'm proposing it is that we should pay our people if we're bringing in subsidized businesses such as Walmart and others, and we do this in Rapid City all the time. They're called tax increment districts, TIFs. And I'm for them, appropriately used, but I think we should have some teeth. If we're going to spend taxpayers' money to encourage businesses to come in, then I think those businesses should pay as a floor at least the same that we do our public servants. In the case of Rapid City, the starting wage for someone starting for the city is about $11 an hour plus benefits. Now that's not fantastic, but that's well above minimum wage, and it is at least a start for survivable income for a young person to start out and stay in the state. It got pretty good press traction, but it was killed. But another bill that I presented, and we found in Pier, that while we reached across the partisan divides in the Senate, there's still a great deal of partisanism in terms of who gets credit. I've long worked in the whole area of energy and environment. I've worked in and out of Africa for about 25 years and have been familiar with solar, biogas, and the alternate energies. So I proposed what is called the Green Buildings Bill, a LEEDS bill. And this was really borrowed from other states. The state of Pennsylvania's had it for 10 years. And what you do, you pay a little bit more up front for the cost of a building, 3 to 9%. But you recoup that on average in about 3 years. And then for the next 25 years of that building, it saves you a great deal of money. And what Pennsylvania did was say, all right, in the future, all buildings in Pennsylvania are going to meet standards. They're going to use less energy. They're going to have better windows. They're going to have solar. They're going to have biofuels ready to use them. Well, lo and behold, I met with the PUC and their staff in early December, and I just shared this particular bill with them. And a little bit later, the governor comes out with his State of the State address, and he says, we need a LEED Silver standard. And no one knew what a LEED Silver standard was until the press found out that that was the bill that I had shared with his son, Brian Rounds. Now, Brian's a wonderful young man, engineer graduate, and I'm pleased that whatever happened that got into the State of the State address. Well, when I presented my particular bill to the committee, it was defeated on a party line vote, but then immediately the governor brought his bill forward, which the press said was not as good as the bill that I had presented. But indeed, today, we do have the LEED Silver standard, a standard for future state buildings that will save money for all of us and lower the greenhouse gas footprint on our environment. And that's unfortunately kind of the way Pier is still working. To get any legislation through, it has to have the Republican lead on it. But I don't care who gets credit. I think we need good legislation in this state. Another piece that we tried very hard to get through, David alluded to the funds we have in reserve. If you count the reserve fund and our trust funds, it's nearly $2 billion. And about $1 billion of that is in trust funds. Rainy day funds is the way I'm afraid our extreme Republican colleagues tend to look at it. The moderates are much better on it. But we have an education fund alone that is about $435 million. And what Scott Heidepriam, our leader, proposed was that, especially with this market fluctuating so much, rather than just investing in the market, let's invest in our people. Let's take the interest off that trust for just 5 years and devote it to teachers, to give us competitive teacher salaries. And just the interest... Just the interest from that fund alone would increase education funding 20% a year over 5 years. And with that, we would finally get to a point where our teachers can compete with Wyoming, Nebraska, with Montana, with